Last night I got mad about something really stupid that I remembered.
Good.
We can talk about it whenever after this, or
Oh, you don't want it live and recorded? The stupid
we
thing you
can
got
talk
mad
live.
about?
It's just got nothing to do with the subject.
Yeah, we're recording now, so tell
Yeah.
me if you want.
Well, so I was just thinking about this whole Seth Rich story, right? Because I was listening to a true crime podcast yesterday, and for whatever reason, I recalled this Seth Rich story. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Um, there's a there's actually a documentary series on Netflix called The Web of Deceit or Web of Crime, Web of Lies, or something like that. And it shows how much um, people are defrauded on the internet. But one of the episodes is about the Seth Rich case, and it bitches about people wanting to solve the Seth Rich murder. It
Mm-hmm.
makes them look ridiculous and evil, basically, because they're not listening to the wishes of the family. Because Seth Rich's family said, "Stop it, guys! We don't want this investigated." Blah 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 blah. And I was just thinking, this may be the first murder in human history where the news media is bitching at people who want the case solved.
And the family's bitching about
And the
wanting the
family,
case
right?
solved.
So like imagine like some a woman dies, and the husband says, "No, guys, come on, don't look any further. I don't like this. It
Yeah,
offends
wouldn't,
me."
wouldn't she immediately be a suspect?
But he would immediately, but according to this new Seth Rich rule, anytime the husband says, "Now stop investigating," we have to respect the wishes of the family. I mean, the clown world level that doesn't stop.
Well, I mean, sometimes I have to sit back and realize I think we've always been in clown world. It's just with the internet, we've finally been able to challenge it. And when we challenge it, they don't go, "Oh yeah, you're right. We were doing bullshit and you caught us." No, no, no. You're right. They just like get more clown world. They just like hype it up more and more and more. And I don't know, like, is it always been this way and we're just noticing more and are calling it out, or are they having to like double and triple and quadruple and quintuple it
Well,
to keep up for the fact that we keep pointing it out?
the Seth Rich situation is so blatant because normally when they cover shit up, they would suicide someone, right? They would say it's suicide, done deal. But this is actually officially an unsolved murder, right? This is the
Hmm.
only unsolved murder in murder history that you're not allowed to inquire about. It's absolutely amazing to me.
Yep. Clown world. Now that Nemo's got that off his chest,
Thank you.
let's talk about what we came to talk about, which is weaponry and military systems and military technology, a la our favorite, one and only historical executive, who is who is it, Nima?
Peter Zahan,
Oh well,
Carol Quigley.
Carol Quigley. We're going to be looking
I
at
was
Peter
kidding.
Zahan because Peter
Peter
Zahan
Zahan
is who
is
brought it
way
up.
too much of a dumbass to be qualified for that title.
So it, obviously, if you've listened to the show, you've heard us talk about Carol Quigley. You heard us talk about the evolution of civilizations and what we feel the most important concept from Carol Quigley is this idea of institutionalization of instruments. The idea that a institution, or excuse me, a societal organization is created to achieve a certain goal, and at some point that societal organization acquires a vested interest that becomes more interested in feeding itself than it is in achieving whatever the goal is supposed to be. And often the goal will become second, at best secondary to whatever the organization is now doing, the original goal, or at worst, even antagonistic to what the organization is now doing. Perfect example is the news media, like Nima and I were just laughing about, is what's the purpose of the news media? Well, theoretically, the purpose of the news media is to inform the citizenry about what's happening in the world, right? Well, what do we have now, at least in the United States? We have a media that actively inhibits the citizenry
The
from
purpose
knowing
of
what's going on in the world.
the purpose of the news media used to be that if there's a murder, they try to solve it or help solving it. And
Now they
today's
prevent
news
it.
media proactively prevents you from solving a murder. So there you
Right,
go, the exact inversion of
right.
the
Now, we're
goal.
not going to be talking about that today. I'm just bringing that up because that's kind of the core concept that Quigley springs from to talk about all of his historical ideas. But we're going to hone in a little bit more specifically on an idea that Quigley points out, which is weapons technology and military technology in societies and civilizations, and that the political structure of Earth, basically, but more specifically, the political structure of societies and civilizations really revolves around weapon systems. And I'm going to read something briefly from this is Tragedy and Hope. Normally we're reading from Evolution of Civilizations, but he's got I think a more concise description here in Tragedy and Hope, because he talks about how societies go through periods of specialist weapons, and I'll just read the thing. So on the military level, he's talking about Western civilization. In Western civilization, in the 20th century, the chief development has been a steady increase in the complexity and the cost of weapons. When weapons are cheap to get and easy to use, that almost anyone can use them after a short period of training, armies are generally made up of large masses of amateur soldiers. Such weapons we call amateur weapons, and such armies we might call mass armies of citizen soldiers. The age of Pericles in classical Greece and in the 19th century in Western civilization were periods of amateur weapons and citizen soldiers. But by the 19th century, wait, lost my spot. But the 19th century was preceded, as was the age of Pericles, by a period in which weapons were expensive and required long training to use. Such weapons we call specialist weapons. Periods of specialist weapons are generally periods of small armies of professional soldiers, usually mercenaries. Now here's the kind of the key kicker that like you would never ever learn in public school. In a period of specialist weapons, the minority have such weapons. Oh, sorry. In a period of specialist weapons, the minority who have such weapons can usually force the majority who lack them to obey. Thus, a period of specialist weapons tends to give rise to a period of minority rule and authoritarian government. But a period of amateur weapons is a period in which all men are roughly equal in military power, and a majority can compel a minority to yield, and a majority rule or even democratic government tends to arise. There you have it right there, Nima. do, you,
Yeah,
do you need more proof that the Second Amendment is important?
right. I was just going to say, so wouldn't it be nice if we had it in our constitution that, oh, wait, we do have that. But yeah, the people who oppose the Second Amendment are tyrants and authoritarians and or deluded by the propaganda of tyrants and authoritarians.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about the propaganda of the in quotes anti-Second Amendment people, because it actually brings us to a very important point, which is what we're going to get into this video that we're going to react to, is that what's your AR-15 going to do against a nuclear weapon? You can't fight the government. They've got tanks and bombers and right. So basically saying that the weapons that you have access to would be obsolete in fighting the government, so you can't actually fight the government anyway. So what do you need the weapons for? Right now, that is actually, I mean, first off, like you just said, if you're trying to take away somebody's weapons, you're authoritarian, right? There's just literally no other room for anything else. But as we're going to see here with Zehan, and this is what Quigley kind of mentions before he dies, basically, that he's seeing in the offing, is that when he talks about this period of specialist weapons and amateur weapons, most history is in the category of amateur weapons. I mean, he says right here it's pretty rare. The 19th century in Western civilization and the age of Pericles in ancient Greece are like two exceptions to the specialist weapon timing. But in modern day, we're seeing like this third option that's neither amateur weapon or specialist weapon. Because, I mean, the nuclear bombs kind of have to take off the table for this conversation, because with mutual assured destruction, they're kind of the weapon of last resort. So I mean, even now we're seeing in Russia invading Ukraine, nobody's throwing nuclear weapons at each other. Hopefully they continue not to. It's still in quotes, conventional
I mean,
warfare.
even if
But
it's
even if
mutually,
you, what's that?
even if mutually assured destruction is a thing, even if that wasn't the case, nukes still don't help. Like, did nukes help the U.S. conquer Iraq or Afghanistan?
Exactly.
Like, they could have nuked them, and those countries would have had no opportunity to fight back, but they didn't, because they would not solve the problem of, a whole dispersed group of people who are not friendly to your rule still being around. I mean, you can't kill off everyone, right? That can't be the goal, anyways, because that's your tax base, that's your
Kill off
capital
everyone, destroy
resources,
everything, poison it for a century. Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think nukes are really kind of pointless, and even if you did use them, they wouldn't help you win the war at the end of the day. I mean, World War II, I guess Japan was already so much weakened from the blockades and all the other warfare methods. The nukes were just kind of like
The final
uh,
kicker.
the final kicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So taking nukes off the table, in terms of the specialized weapons we have now, I mean, they're so advanced. Specialized doesn't even really describe them accurately. Like Tomahawk missiles and aircraft carriers and hypersonic jets and nuclear submarine. I mean, these aren't just specialist weapons. I don't think he gives it a term in here, but these are just like hyper technological weapons. Now, obviously, your AR-15. Nemo is sharing
For
his
later,
screen.
it's for,
Oh, for later. Okay, okay. Uh, obviously, your AR-15 doesn't beat Black Hawk helicopter. It doesn't beat nuclear submarine. It doesn't beat aircraft carrier, right?
but a
But what
surface to
we've
air missile does.
it does. But can you and I afford? Well, we're getting there, right? How what we've seen in the last few wars. And Afghanistan, I mean, is kind of the quintessential example of this, because Afghanistan seems to just prove this point over and over and over again. It's proved it to the only two superpowers that have ever existed on the face of the planet, both to the USSR and to the United States, which is you have these superpowers that can come in with absolutely overwhelming force. They have all the technology on their side. However, the $20 million Black Hawk helicopter can get taken down by one $5,000 rocket. And even if you have this absolutely incredibly potent, sophisticated military technology, it can become so economically expensive to utilize it. And if you have these smaller weapon systems that, I mean, I'm not saying like, hey, a $5,000 rocket is what every amateur soldier can get their hand on, but it's not a $20 million tank or whatever, right? If these smaller weapons can blow up the really super expensive destructive weapons, then the guerrilla group can cause massive, massive economic damage to the superpower. And at some point, the superpower taps out. And that's exactly what we saw both times in Afghanistan with the USSR and the United States. So I want to pull up this Zahan video, this Peter Zahan video, because what he talks about, because he's given an update to the Ukraine war, the Ukrainian technology that seems to be getting developed and tested out right now against the Russians, assuming that what he says is true, and even if it's not true, I'm still going to analyze his points because it's still valid, is that we may be entering a different phase of warfare where the superpowers aren't so super anymore because of the decentralized nature of this. we need to create a vocabulary for it. We got let's call it the guerrilla weaponry, which is the in quotes $5,000 rocket, right? The guerrilla weaponry versus the superpower weaponry, which is the
Well, the word was
helicopters and aircraft
amateur.
carriers and nuclear submarines and stuff. What's that?
I mean, the word that you used earlier was amateur weaponry, right?
Yeah, amateur weaponry specifically is. Let me read it again. When weapons are so cheap to get and easy to use that almost anyone can use them after a short period of training, armies are generally made up of large masses of amateur soldiers. I don't think we're seeing large masses of amateur soldiers. I think we're seeing coordinated small groups of guerrilla units.
Okay. Yeah.
So let me pop up this Zehan video and maximize it accordingly. Here we go. Let's listen to Le Zehan and him not talking about Bitcoin. That was a jab at Nima.
Hey everybody, Peter Zine here, coming to you from Colorado. We're in the calm between the snowstorms. Got 40 inches last week. What we're going to get this weekend is 4 to 6 inches. Almost seems like a rounding error in comparison. Anyway, 60 degrees because Colorado. Today we're going to talk about the revolution in military affairs that is now going through a second phase. So the first revolution in military affairs happened in the 1990s and 2000s when the United States started to marry information technologies to its military. It's a combination of sensors and targeting information, whether it's on the method of delivering the ordnance or in satellite or attached to the weapon itself. So, for example, joint direct attack munitions fall into that category, as do cruise missiles like the Tomahawk. Important stuff. And it basically took whatever explosive ordnance that you had and allowed you to deliver it to a target with a very high degree of accuracy. So instead of having to carpet bomb things like we used to in Vietnam and ages before, now you just send one or two weapons out and hit the specific target that you're at. There was talk for a good long time that if you marry precision weapons with hypersonics, that all of a sudden all of the rules of warfare go away and you can just have a handful of hypersonics to defend everything. And then we discovered things like jamming and the fact that people don't have one tank, they have 100,000 people in infantry, and the math never just worked out. Hypersonics are just way too expensive. It's not that they don't have a role to play, it's just that it's not the determining role.
So first off, just to summarize what he's saying here is that the 90s we saw an evolution of weaponry that allowed us to we could stop carpet bombing things, Nima, because we could target better. Great. So that's the phase one, like he said. He's going to get into phase two here in a second.
So that was kind of phase one. We're going through phase two now, which is the democratization of the application of these technologies. And so instead of it being controlled from the White House or from a general's chair, individual soldiers are now getting command of this sort of information, can use it to make targets on an autonomous basis. And we're seeing this, of course, most aggressively in Ukraine, mostly with drones. The Ukrainians are following a four-part strategy at the moment. I'm sure this is going to evolve quite a bit. Phase one is applying these drone technologies to things like jet skis and loading them up with a couple 100 pounds of explosives and sending them out to target Russian naval vessels. That process has been so effective, as I've noted in earlier videos, that basically the western half of the Black Sea is now completely no-go for the Russian fleet.
You hear that? The Russian fleet can't enter the western half of the Black Sea because of some jet skis.
Yeah, what immediately came to mind for me was the parachute Mario Kart jihadis dropping in on Israel from Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, that's also kind of a silly little device that some superpower, ostensible superpower, was powerless against, apparently. I mean, whether they chose to or not, it's a different question.
Right, but it still elaborates the point where it's like, okay, you got the ship that's cost $1 zillion to make and 20 years to build it, and then a jet ski with 50 pounds of explosive can go boom and blow a hole in it and sink it.
I mean, it seems kind of pathetic because I would have thought that they had anti-torpedo technology, anti all
So
kinds of
I don't
aircraft
I don't know if
missiles.
he says it in this video, but I heard him say in another video where all the boats are they're designed to shoot far away. And so when something comes and to shoot aircraft, and so when something comes in close like that, they can't aim down to shoot at it. Now, I don't know about the anti-torpedo technology because that is an interesting question, but the point still stands that they're making a jet ski an effective weapon against
I just
naval
have to
vessels.
ask, have we verified this? Because Peter says a lot of stuff. I don't know. Like, he
Let's
also
just keep listening because I mean, this was actually I remember listening to a series on World War One from Hardcore History. George was his name. I want to say
George
Costanza,
Carlin.
but that's not it. George Carlin, thank you.
No, not George
That
Carlin. George Carlin is a comedian, right? George.
Oh yeah, I was listening to him earlier. That's why I said George Carlin. Oh my god, I gotta look it up.
George
Hold
Costanza.
on.
No, just kidding.
Hardcore History. Dan Carlin.
Dan Carlin.
Oops. Oops. Okay, so I was listening to Dan Carlin on this history of World War One, and a point that he brought out during about World War One is that there was very, very little naval warfare because there had been this progression of how do we build the biggest boat with the longest range guns that could shoot 10 miles, no 12 miles, no 15 miles, no 18 miles, and all the sides had these massive, massive boats, and nobody ever used them because they were so expensive. They were afraid to sink them because it just took one torpedo. Like they had U-boats, right? The Germans had U-boats at that point. Whatever. It just took one solid strike to sink this, budget-destroying naval vessel. And whether or not this is confirmed, I think it still makes sense. Oh, let me see what Nima's sharing here. I think it's still a viable idea based on what we were just talking about with Afghanistan. Suspected Ukrainian explosive sea drone made from recreational watercraft parts. Exactly. It's theoretically possible that if you can get the explosive over there and you can get it over there on a jet ski, that you could take out a big vessel. And if it's true, then the entire superpower Russian Navy is being held at bay by these basically DIY explosive skis.
Actually, now that you said that, also reminds me of this movie Syriana, where there's two Pakistani kids who get recruited by a terrorist group to run a speedboat into a giant oil tanker or oil refinery somewhere in the Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you watched that.
Never seen it.
movie. But yeah. But it was a suicide attack. But yeah, nowadays you don't even need the suicide bombers anymore.
That's what he's going to get at. Let's bring him back up here.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
And most of their ships, especially the larger ones, simply can't shoot back because anything that's installed on the deck of the ship is designed to hit the horizon or higher, and it can't angle down to target these small boats in the water. So that's number one. Number two is actually something that's much more recent that has come up as a result of the problems with the American Congress getting conventional aid to Ukraine. The Ukrainians have had to find a way to hold the line against the Russians when they're running out of artillery shells. And so what they've started doing is mass producing these very small drones that only have a payload of about a pound, which is about the size of a small grenade. And when the Russians do their human wave tactics, you just send a swarm of them out to go after anything that moves. And it's basically dropping grenades at range into massed infantry. They've done this to the point that in the Battle of Avdiivka, which the Ukrainians technically lost, they were inflicting regularly 8 and 10 to 1 casualty ratios on the Russians, despite not having much artillery. So anti-personnel. Number 3 is mid-range infrastructure strikes. The Ukrainians developed a pair of drones called the Scythe and the Beaver. Of the two, the Beaver is far more technologically competent and has a much longer range and better avionics. Whereas the Scythe is basically a garage project that's practically made out of plywood. It's a fugly little thing. Carries a decent warhead, but less range. And they've been sending these out against any pieces of infrastructure in kind of the near abroad, if you will, within a few hundred kilometers of the front line. And they've used it to target any number of things like refineries in the Russian space, but also fuel depots. And then finally, something where the Americans are getting in on the job was something called the Phoenix Ghost. Now, the Phoenix Ghost only carries a fairly small warhead, typically 5 to 15 pounds. The advantage of the Phoenix Ghost is it's modular and you can put it together on the fly, and it's light enough that one soldier can carry it. Now, originally, when the Phoenix Ghost started coming in, they were going after armored vehicles and supply trucks. But the Ukrainians very, very quickly realized that because they were available in such small volume and because they were so accurate, because unlike a lot of drones, these have a live visual feedback to the controller, they could basically put them in a backpack, send someone hiking or driving into Russia, and 1,000 miles from the front line, take it out, put it together, and send it against an unprotected target. And most of the refinery attacks we have seen in Ukraine in recent 2 weeks maybe, are probably Ukrainian special forces operating with American-made Phoenix Ghosts deep within the Russian interior.
So you hear that?
Yeah.
That's wild. So this is exactly what I was just talking about. You got someone, theoretically, I don't know if he literally means a backpack, but if someone can carry this technology, hike through the woods, assemble it, and then, get out his, PS5 controller and fly this thing to a tender target like an oil refinery or a fuel depot or something like that, or a pipeline. This is some crazy decentralized warfare. What would you pull up here?
I have a picture of the dude you were just talking about.
Okay, there he is. We have this crazy decentralized warfare where, I mean, if we go back again to what Quigley was saying, which is, okay, whether it's specialized or amateur, I think the more important point is, can the minority dominate the majority? And if we're in a situation where these small payloads can cause damage to these incredibly economically expensive technologies, ships and tanks and whatever, refineries, whatever, and it could be decentralized to the point where, and I think Peter's going to mention this in a minute, let's say you take 10,000 people and send them with backpacks into the woods, and they're all independently flying these little suckers around. That's like fighting a swarm of bees. And I could really see that if this is being worked out now, theoretically here in the Ukraine, and that this is modern technology, we've mentioned this before in terms of where we see, we usually talk about Western civilization, but I guess this applies to the whole Earth, that we're more and more moving into the world of decentralization at almost every strata of our society and our civilization. This is some serious decentralization applied to the military sector. And if this technology can proliferate to an underdog like the Ukraine, what else can it proliferate to?
Well, I mean, the Ukraine isn't an underdog. The Ukraine is NATO and the US and the CIA and the most powerful military in the world, basically shipping weapons every day, right? So I wouldn't necessarily call them underdog, but your point is valid that warfare is becoming more decentralized one way or another. And all countries will have to adapt to that. And actually, not even just countries, all political, social, whatever kind of cultural strata you want to look at, has the ability to pursue their claims and to stand their ground using this kind of technology.
Yeah. And if that's the case, would we therefore be entering a period, theoretically, if we go on Quigley's point here, of How did he say it?
Democratization.
Majority rule or even a democratic government tends to rise.
Yeah. No, I mean,
I like how he differentiates between majority rule and democratic government.
well, also even like how this point is just how rare that is, really. Yeah. So this is, if we're done talking about military technology, there's that thing that I shared earlier, and Zehan also mentioned at the beginning of this clip, that warfare in and of itself is totally changing into a new kind of domain. It's not even really all about weaponry. It's actually much more about the ability to manipulate, the access to information hubs and nodes, to disseminate information to people. Uh, as much as I hate the word misinformation, obviously plays a huge
You
role.
got to use it. You can't battle the noble lie.
Right. Actually, I'm just going to share this thing that I shared in the beginning. Let's see, where is this? So Wikipedia about fifth generation warfare. Okay. Fifth generation warfare is, I think there's some truth to this theory. Fifth generation warfare is warfare that is conducted primarily through non kinetic military action, such as social engineering, misinformation, cyber attacks, along with emerging technologies such as AI and fully autonomous systems. Fifth generation warfare has been described by Daniel Abbott as a war of information and perception. So, to add to these different technologies that you just discussed, the jet ski drones, the modular drones that Zehan described, a huge part of warfare today is this kind of warfare, access to information nodes to disseminate misinformation and to pursue social engineering, and the ability to conduct cyber attacks, in other words, IT know how, uh, plays a huge role in today's warfare. Some people say we're already in World War III, right? It's just fought on a different plane, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And to add to that, to to um, to add to what you were saying, is how we're entering a time of decentralized warfare. Um, in this realm too that we're looking at, that I was just looking at, fifth generation warfare, right? The ability to control the internet, misinformation, cyber attacks, etc. For the longest time, we've been ruled over by very centralized organizations. The internet was basically created by the DoD. All the big companies, big tech companies, they came out of DoD grants or some kind of military relationship. Amazon still, I think, has a $6 billion contract with the CIA or something like that. Um, so in that realm too, we are now going into decentralization with the appearance of cryptocurrency, with the appearance of peer-to-peer, and with the emergence of decentralized AI at this point, as we discussed in our recent show. So on that, even on that fifth generation warfare plane, we are inevitably moving towards a more decentralized and thus a more democratic type of warfare, if you want to call it
Well, and then let
that.
me. Here's from Evolution of Civilizations, just a piece of a paragraph. The invention of just finalizing this point, the invention of new weapons and new tactics that will be so cheap to obtain and so easy to use that they will increase the effectiveness of guerrilla warfare so greatly that the employment of our present weapons of mass destruction will become futile, and on this basis there can be a revival of democracy and of political decentralization in all three parts of our present world. And the three parts he talks about are the US, the USSR, and everywhere else it's not the US and the USSR. I mean, I think that just exactly summarized what you were just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, the warfare is changing, technologies are changing, and obviously the internet and information is playing a huge role. There's another document written by NATO called Cognitive Warfare, where they literally was it Cognitive Warfare? I have to look it up. They literally discuss ideas that disagreement with the state as if it's a virus, and they use that terminology of a virus and the virus spread, the infection spreading. Basically, people who disagree with the government are
Right.
sick with the virus, and they're spreading this virus. And so they're all over. This is why they're so obsessively censoring everything. Where they can't let you talk about things that they disagree with, because they think, or maybe they've realized, that this is the new frontier of war and they want to dominate it. And in the process, they're just pushing us towards circumvention and building around their walled gardens and their centralized solutions to
Yeah.
come up
Well,
with technologies that they cannot possibly compete with when the time has come, ultimately. Like David Johnson was saying on our video, 95% of servers run Linux today. They don't run Windows. 95% run Linux. The same will happen with AI, he says. Decentralization is going to win, right? An AI network that gets your input and my input and everyone's input from just downloading a piece of software and running it and
you might
providing
want to
it
explain
feedback.
it. You might want to take time to explain that idea, because it was completely new to me when he showed it to us last week. The decentralized AI, Morpheus.
Yeah, Morpheus AI. Let me just pull it up. Morpheus AI is a
Go ahead and share it.
decentralized AI network that's powered by cryptocurrency, that is open source. The author of the paper is anonymous, so it's kind of like a Bitcoin Satoshi situation where there's nobody who can be,
Can't shoot
dragged out of
anybody.
their apartment at 3 a.m. to stop the whole thing. Did I share the right thing just now?
Yes, you
Yeah.
did.
So this is Morpheus, MOR.org, Morpheus AI. Everyone can download it. Everyone can participate in the free launch is open. You can stake Ether and earn more tokens. And this is pretty much unstoppable. Anyone can install a MetaMask. Anyone can run this stuff. And this is an AI that actually gathers your feedback. It's an AI that's actually curious about what you think and what you prefer and what you want, and then adjusts its thinking over time, as opposed to this Google Bard open AI approach of, here it is, now you get to use our superior intelligence software, and
While
it
we
comes up,
collect all the data from you in order to protect and control you in the future.
yeah, and it comes up with all kinds of stupid ass responses that could only have been hacked or configured into it by former blue-haired Twitter employees, for example. Like the founding fathers were African Americans, right? Google Bard came up with pictures of founding fathers,
Right.
and they're African Americans. And you ask it the difference between a man and a woman, it has to inject gender ideology in its response. It's so freaking up. It can't for the life of it figure out the number of COVID deaths and injuries that are on the CDC's official VAERS website. Sorry, I can't figure that part. But you're a superior artificial intelligence system, but you can't figure that part. Well, because it's been curated, it's been censored out of it. Those kinds of AI systems will not be able to compete with a truly decentralized open source AI that can run on everyone's computer around the world.
And
Everyone
then
can
doesn't
be.
centralize your data, right? I think that this is an important point too, is that whenever you're running whatever Google or Chat GDP or whatever AIs, like all your data is being like extracted and sucked up, and the AI is talking with itself to figure out how to control you. If it's decentralized and there's no centralizing factor to suck up all this data and digest it in order to figure out how to control the human race, yeah, of course that's the
Well,
the AI
so
the mega AI can't compete with that, and B, you can't control humanity the same way if you can't centralize all the data.
yeah, so important thing I want to point out, because this is so huge, people still don't realize what a huge revolution is underway in cryptography, or rather, due to cryptography. Um, Cryptocurrency has made this use case popular, right? Because I just want to explain the existing model. The existing model is you little dipshit, uh, provide your username, your password, and all your address, your preferences, your this and that to Google. And so you're sitting
Your
down
driver's
here.
license, your social security number. Yes.
So you're sitting down here with a computer. That's all you have. And up here is Google with your payment information, your login information, your data, your everything basically. It's all stacked into one stupid ass blob that's centrally controlled by one or two or three mega corporations. That is such an immature model for long-term sustainability. And what's happening with cryptocurrency and private public key encryption now is that this entire um, monolithic blob is being broken up. So number one, the security layer now sits on your computer where you have the private keys. Okay, all your data can stay on your computer. You don't have to provide it to a centralized data. The only reason why websites that take your payments gather your data is because, or the biggest reason, because if the credit card transaction fails, they need to have recourse. They need to be able to pursue this, to come after you. But with cryptocurrency, that's not necessary anymore. With a cryptocurrency payment, the payment is sent, and it's sent without your identity ever having to be revealed. So it separates value transmission from identity. So the security layer, the security layer, your personal data is on your computer. The the financial data sits on a blockchain. Okay, it's public. However, it can be encrypted, and only you have access to it with your private key. Now, the only thing that the service providers do is provide business intelligence. That's the only layer that they retain. They don't need your passwords, they don't need your anything. They need minimal data about you. So, this whole system of storing all this data in one blob is being broken apart, and it's being moved to the places where these things are supposed to be. Your data is supposed to stay with you. Your private key is supposed to stay with you. But today we're sharing passwords with Amazon. We type in passwords. That is gone. That's over. That's going to be over sooner or later. Private public key encryption is going to be the way people log in on Web3 with their MetaMask, with their wallet extension. So the security layer is on your side of things. It resides on your end. The business intelligence is the only thing that the solutions providers, the apps providers, the smart contracts providers are responsible for and are in charge of. And the things that they have no business owning or knowing about, they don't need those things because value transmission can happen without retention of that kind of data.
Well,
So
and
you
I think
see,
it's important to emphasize, you used the word circumvent earlier, is that due to the nature of this technology, you can't just as a government or a controlling political entity, you can't just stop it. You can't be like, I passed the law that stops this, because it's so decentralized and it's so anonymous and it's so encrypted that, like you said at the beginning with
and
Morpheus,
and it's open
an
source at
anonymous
the same
person
time.
wrote it, and the whole thing is set up that there is no organization,
Right.
there is no company, there is
And,
there's nobody to arrest.
and the data, the data that is supposed to be public, which is the data about what this black box actually does, is public because it's open source, right? That's the
Mhm.
opposite of today. Today, OpenAI, Bard, and all these things, they run in like proprietary black boxes at the end of the day. They have all that data hidden inside their black box. They have all your data. They have your passwords. They have your address. They have your credit card data information. All this stuff. So they're hiding all the data that is supposed to be public, and they have access to all the data that they have no business having access to right now. But that's being flipped upside down with a decentralized model.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And just bring this back to the
And the
original
open source
conversation.
model, sorry.
Yeah, bring this back to the original conversation. That all these are different, just more and more examples of decentralization, of the minority having an increasing issue dominating the majority. Same in the AI world, same in the military world. I mean, as you pointed out, we're in the fifth age of, or fifth phase, or whatever it was called,
I mean,
of
even
military
even
technology.
Zehan in the beginning of his clip, he was saying the second or first revolution was combining information technology with weaponry,
Right.
right? So these
Yes.
are blending into. They're all part of military operations,
Right.
military
Well,
equipment, essentially.
and then every aspect, including military. And I think the reason it's so important to point out the military is because it's easy to make what I would say is an intuitive remark, kind of like the anti-Second Amendment propaganda, which is to say, well, the weapons are so advanced and so technological and so massively destructive. How could you, the individual, ever hope to compete against something like that? Well, here it is. Here it is. In every strata of the society, every stratum, and all the strata of society, we're seeing this decentralization appear everywhere. And so, like Carroll Quigley pointed out in 1966 when he wrote this book, the more we see this, the more we may see the democratization, I guess in the good sense of that word, of society, and less authoritarianism.
And for what it's worth, I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but in Quigley's analysis of the different stages of expansion, or the different repetitions of expansion that the
In Western civilization,
Western civilization,
Yeah.
that we've gone through, we've always flipped from an what does he call it, autonomous control to planning, centralized. Yeah, he calls it he calls it conscious control. Yeah.
Okay.
Automatic. So automatic versus conscious control, right? So we had feudalism. It was automatic control. There was no much high level planning. It was a lot of small units, a lot of small fiefdoms. Then we have commercial capitalism with the advent of the chartered company,
And we get the big political dynasties,
right,
in that
so
era.
that was a
Yep.
centralized system. Then it went into
Industrial.
it went to industrial capitalism, which was once again automatic control. Then we went into financial, which was still automatic, but then we went into monopoly capitalism, and then globalist capitalism, which were conscious control once again, planned from the top down. And now, if what we're saying is true, if our speculation is true, that we're moving into a fifth, is it a fifth or a fifth age of expansion, we may be moving back into automatic control, not conscious control. I mean, maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's maybe it's a false trend.
Correlation. Yeah.
Correlation that doesn't exist. But just for what it's worth, interesting to point out that it's always flipped back and forth, and it just happens to fit with what's going on right now.
Absolutely. I think that buttons it up here. That, and I gotta go.
Me too.
I gotta go hang out with my kids and bring them to kid things. But I think that was an excellent conversation on more decentralization stuff. And on, on one hand, it's scary. I think it's always scary when military technology changes. But on the other hand, I think it's hopeful, because any tool that we have to thwart the trend of authoritarianism, I think, is grand. Nima, what do you
Well,
think?
when centralization and just being a giant asshole doesn't pay anymore, there's less of an incentive to be a tyrant and be an asshole, right? So one would hope that this trend uh, reduces the number of assholes in positions of power, I guess.
Let's leave it at that. This has been Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of Ireta TV. May we slow the trend of centralization of assholes. Check us out at ireta.tv. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.